Hi, my name is Christina Heimstead, and I'm here to talk about money, particularly personal finance. Today, talking about credit scores. Before we get into talking about credit scores, I want to talk about the overall health of the current economy and real estate and everything. As of right now, going into Election Day, today is November 6th, things, at least real estate wise, have quieted down. The volume of transactions has decreased significantly, depending on what specifics you're looking at. Sometimes it's as much as, I think, 20 to 25% for the local economy here. Outside of that, jobs are still at super low rates. The troubling part, probably in particular for real estate, is that interest rates are still increasing. I think I read a report yesterday that said that interest rates were at 7-year highs. So not particularly great if you plan on buying real estate. But at the same time, my theory is that has either deterred or distracted a lot of potential buyers. So your normal pool of buyers has decreased significantly. So if you are in the position to buy, likelihood is that sellers are not getting the offers that they should be getting. They're not getting the opportunity to look at an offer, and they're not having the opportunity to start that conversation. So if you're in that position, now's the time to go hunting. So gear up and go. It's my favorite time. This is like aggressive shopping. Love it. If you're a seller, be patient, market your property correctly, make sure that you have an awareness of kind of what's going on and who your potential competitors, and if somebody is passing on your home to go get another one, why is that? And what is it that's wrong with yours, or what have you? So it's an interesting marketplace. Tax laws should be an interesting change here, and we're all wrapping up the year trying to figure out how we did and what we're gonna owe and whatnot. We had a corporate tax meeting that was quite what I would call highbrow or heady. A little above my pay grade, as I like to say, but there are a lot of changes. Should be interesting to see what happens, but there's a lot of I want to say a slight stagnation here. So there's a lot of creativity that people are trying to pool in order to make something work, either for their business or for themselves. So be patient, do your homework, and be aggressive is my 2 cents. But more importantly, on the personal finance side, the reason I wanted to talk about credit scores, I know I've talked about it some already, but to me the significance is that there are an awful lot of millennials or even non-millennials that don't seem to have a good understanding of what a credit score not only does for you, but communicates to somebody else. And I think that's the massive point that a lot of people miss. There are also elements in terms of how to improve your score, because I think a lot of people, myself included years ago, did not quite understand what and how things would impact your score, improve it or otherwise. What's a good score? What's a bad score? And what's the significance of it? Part of the reason why I think this is so important to talk about is, first and foremost, one of my favorite stories to tell is we had a potential tenant at one point who was going to replace one tenant that was moving out. It was a house of 4 people. It was just a replacement. We have a number of properties like that where, say, there's a group of 4, just because one moves out to move in with a significant other or what have you, doesn't mean that the other 3 want to be displaced. So what they do is they end up replacing that one, and we're talking about 4 young single people as opposed to a family or something or other. So the existing tenants, had met with some people. They decided that they liked this one woman, or girl. She was at the front of the pack. They did not know that she would have been older than all of them by at least 10%, closer to 20%. We'll say 20% here. Which, not the end of the world, but it's something when somebody's in maybe a different life space or what have you. But what I would do is have them kind of meet with her. They liked her, and then I would ask them to send me her financials so that I could financially prove her, because in a perfect world, you don't want to rent to 3 people who are financially, we'll define it as risky, and 1 that's stable, because if for whatever reason 3 mess up and then everything falls on the 1, the way a lease reads in the state of California is that you're equally and severally liable, which means that I don't really care who it comes from, it just needs to get paid. And so for that 1 responsible one and the other 3 bad apples, it's challenging. So I try to at least keep a certain minimum and keep the others in mind in terms of kind of where they are at. And I'll bring up another tenant in just a minute. But so this girl who had applied, she and I talked on the phone, and she said that a decade ago she had a boyfriend who apparently ruined her credit. And I was like, okay, that was a decade ago. It should be just fine now. Well, what happened was she, rather than addressing her credit and doing her homework, trying to figure out what she could do to improve it, had just more or less buried her head in the sand and ignored it and started paying for everything in cash. So she had told me that she paid for everything in cash. She had a motorcycle that she paid for in cash, not a car. And that she just didn't keep any credit cards, nothing. It was just cash all the time, which I understand might work for some people. But the problem is that as a landlord who's reviewing your application, I am basically letting you borrow an asset with the expectation that you'll pay me an ongoing rate for it. Well, without some sort of history to determine your financial responsibility of payment history, I'm really just assuming that, okay, you've got this income and you've got some money in the bank, so that's what you do. You pay your rent. But there are late fees. Like if you, for whatever reason, are out of town or something happens and all of a sudden you're paying on the 6th rather than the 1st, that's a late fee. Same goes for credit cards, same goes for all the others. And that affects your history. It affects your score. And luckily enough for me and us, sorry. Max, come here. Yeah. Sorry. Beast thought there was somebody at the door. Apparently still does. That was it. Anyways, luckily for us, we don't need to rely on somebody who we define as financially risky. There are enough candidates out there, and they found a different girl, worked out just great, and they're cruising. So we're very, very lucky to have landed in that boat. But another situation is we had other tenants who fell in a very similar situation. This girl moved in, didn't pay her rent the first month, so they had to float her. I have a friend who doesn't want to deal with credit history, and not, I shouldn't say credit history, credit card debt. I think a lot of people get into debt with credit cards because they don't pay it off right away, or they pay the minimum or something, and you can still have credit history. You don't have to go into debt. I mean, to be honest, every time I pull up my score and I look at mine personally on Credit Karma, I know there are lots of other sites. It was just the one I started using, so it's what I'm most familiar with. Every time I look at mine, it'll tell me that I'm utilizing something like 8 to 14% of my credit usage. And at the time, it just means that that's what they've reported on. So it could be that between, X number of credit cards, I'm spending X number of dollars per month. But unless I'm using my credit card and paying that credit card that day, it's going to run some sort of balance. So it looks like it, but it doesn't negate the fact that I pay those off every month. When you look at the report, it says that I pay it all off, and that's just what it does. That's me personally. I have everything set up that way. And it's mostly because I just don't want to pay the interest. Because outside of my one credit card that has a 5% interest rate, which if anybody knows of any other cards that have interest rates that low, I would love to know, because it's awesome just to have as a safety net. But all the others are, especially the ones that I actually use, they're at 16 on the low end, 25 on the high end for the interest rates. And as we covered last time, paying that additional interest sucks. It's just like throwing away free money. Or, well, not free money. It's your hard-earned money, and they're free money because that's the interest rate that you agreed to when you signed up for that credit card. And maybe this would help other people, and look, everybody's different, but I view it as this is the cash in my pocket, and then just like paying a utility, I pay the utility at the end of the month. I pay the credit card at the end of the month. Okay, it's just like an ongoing bill. It's not some big heavy weight. It's the other thing too is I have an understanding of this is how much I spend regularly. Whether it's Target or Chase. I mean, I pay for everything on a credit card, and just to have that history. And in part, for me personally, the reason why I started operating that way is because I had my own kerfuffle. I went to a department store. They offered probably like 10 to 15% off if I signed up for their credit card that day. So I did. And didn't realize that that's what I had done because I was young and dumb. And all of a sudden 6 months later, and I'm in debt, not knowing I'm in debt to this company for a $30 purchase. It's something absurd. And of course, being young and dumb, I'm frustrated. I had no idea that I had done this. I'm pissed off and I'm yelling at them. Close the account, and all of a sudden it was maybe my second credit card at the time, so I only had one other line of credit out, and I had leased a car, but we had leased the car under my dad's name instead of my own, and we did that because it was like $10 cheaper a month. So I mean, when you add it up, it's $360 over the course of 3 years. But in an alternative universe with 20/20 vision or hindsight, I would have had it in my name and sucked it up and paid the extra $10 a month. But anyways, I didn't really know what I was doing then. I was talking to my parents, and they were like, "Well, take a look at your score." Well, I go ahead and take a look at my score. My score, I think, was like in the mid 500s. I was so mad that that had happened, because growing up, that was one of the things that was brought home to me, was that with a good credit score, people give you money. People give you things. Like, and I shouldn't say for free. I mean, but it's like, it's not like the situation with the tenant, that if she had had a credit history for me to look at, I would have been able to lease to her, and it would have been a non-issue. But without that, she became a really poor candidate for us. And despite the fact that our tenants may have really liked her, she was too risky, and I had to disclose that to them. Like, hey, I'm not going to disclose to you what her score is or what have you. I'm going to tell you, though, this is what she told me. And supposedly she had told them the same thing. But I can't. I can't take that on because for whatever reason, she stops paying, they're paying. Then I have to charge them all a late fee because in California, when you don't get the entirety of your rent, you have to charge. You first off can't accept it because it's assumed to be a partial payment, in which case you can't charge a late fee. So you have to return the rent or or just wholeheartedly not accept it, and then charge a late fee on top of it. Which then gets applied to all the tenants. We dealt with this in the past for a long time where we'd get tenants who would pay separately, and you get two that pay on time and one that pays, 5 days late. And the first two don't know that the other one's paying late, and, it's all just hunky-dory. And we resolved it by accepting a single payment. It resolved a lot of issues for us. Because we'd rather have it dealt with internally rather than on us. But it just... nobody wants to deal with that. It's turmoil, it's stressful, and in a perfect world, it's an unnecessary headache that nobody has to deal with. So going back to my story, so it was in the 5s, and I was so mad at myself for getting upset and closing the card rather than keeping that line of credit open and remedying what I had done. Which would have been a much better scenario. But it took time. In order to resolve it, I had to go to my bank, and I think I attempted to open a credit card there and couldn't. My own bank. That was terrible. I think I went to Nordstrom's and Target, and they 6 months apart, I want to say, and they were able to give me cards. I mean, the lines that they offered were almost nothing, but it was something. I was already shopping there, so I think they were okay with it. But yeah, I mean, it took a really long time, and I remember just sitting there waiting, and I remember being part of the reason why it really stressed me out was I was leasing my car. I had a set amount of time I needed, or we'll call it a window. I had a window of time that I needed to be very aggressive in remedying my credit score problem. I think at the time it was 2 years. Because if you go in and you opt for a new car, whether it's lease or buy, they're going to pull your credit, and your credit will in part dictate the interest rate in your payment. Because if for whatever reason they decide that you're risky, they're going to ask for you to pay for it in cash up front. If they decide that you're not too risky, but you have an okay score but not a good or an excellent score, then they might increase your interest rate slightly just to hedge their risk. So, and another good way to kind of mess around with it is Trulia in particular, I think, has a really good score calculator. If for whatever reason I don't feel like calling a lender and I just want to see, if I were to hypothetically buy this property, or if a client were to, and this is the structure, what's the loan and the interest rate going to be? And they give you the flexibility when you hit the advance button to check out today's mortgage rates to say, I have this score, I have that score, and you can see the adjustments and how it changes based on your personal credit score. In addition to, depending on how much equity you have and what have you, all of it obviously is subject to change when you actually apply. These are all just kind of possible scenarios. Doesn't mean that they're written in sand. Written in stone. That's the same. But it's still kind of a good good opportunity to tinker around and kind of get a better understanding of how that ratio system works. But I think the valuable thing that I learned in going through that was I was diligent. I checked my score once a week, which is how frequently Credit Karma allowed me to check it. Checked it religiously. They even will give you recommendations of like, hey, I think you should open another line of credit. You know, you may qualify for a card with points and that may work for you here. Or you may qualify for a personal loan, and your personal loan that you might be able to get would be a lower interest rate than what your credit card has. In fact, I know of somebody who did this. They had significant amount of debt, and they looked and realized that a lot of it was on credit cards. The credit cards had interest rates close to 30%. They were able to qualify for a personal loan and then pay off their credit card debt and reduce their interest rate by at least 15%, which then enables them to pay all of that debt off sooner. But there's so many great tools in terms of stimulators and in terms of like, hey, if I close my oldest account, if I got a new line of credit, if I didn't pay off this bill, if I paid off all my debt, every hypothetical situation you could possibly think of, they've got a potential answer. And it's not set in stone. It's just a potential scenarios to the direction things could go. And I think a better way to assess it is just, does it go up? Does it go down? Good. I think the other thing too about tootling around on all those and looking to see if I do this, this is what happens. It gives you a better understanding of how to navigate your score and to understand what's good, what's bad, even on the individual steps. So maybe that means that you increase your score by 5 points per month. I mean, maybe that's aggressive. I don't know. It depends on where you're starting from. But there's so many helpful tools that way. Another example is one of the important things too is having a number of different lines of credit. Part of it is being able to juggle and manage different bills. The other thing too is being able to show that you are responsible and can pay off your cards in multiple avenues. The other thing too is that you're not maxing them all out. There was somebody else who would max them out, and credit health was not impeccable because most creditors don't want to see that if they give you 20 grand per month to use, because that's your limit, that you don't use all 20 grand a month, every month, even if you pay it off. I mean, that's part of the reason why I mentioned the fact that mine's at, 10% plus or minus 2% in terms of usage. It makes them nervous because, if you've used everything that you can, A, why'd you have to do that in the first place? B, then it means that if you don't pay it all off, you're paying 30% interest on 20 grand. That's brutal. And that would take you forever to pay all that off. There's just... I've been trying to think of a good analogy, and maybe it's just something like when you work out, and the likelihood that you hit 100% to the point of where you're going to keel over and die, or more than 100%, pretty low, and it's probably not a good idea to get there. You want to hit a certain zone of you're moving, you're being active. It hopefully doesn't hurt in an injury, painful way, but you're moving, you're doing something and it's working, you're exercising it. In the same way you want to think of like cardiac health that way. Like, you're supposed to move a bit, you know, keep your blood pressure at a certain point, keep your pulse at a certain point. You're supposed to kind of use your body. You're not supposed to just sit in a chair and either sit on your computer all day, sit around watching Netflix, whatever it is that you're doing. You're supposed to kind of move, right? Because your body's designed to more or less do that to some extent, pending you don't have some sort of health issue. But you're supposed to. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to use it. You're supposed to figure out what works. And I think your credit score is pretty similar. It's like you're supposed to use it. Don't maximize it out, because then you're going to injure yourself and then you're out for a little while. And definitely use it, because if you never use it, just like your body, you're going to like trip over nothing, not be able to walk anywhere. I mean, I'm thinking about like just to the extent that your muscles atrophy, you don't want your body or your credit score to just completely atrophy. Because like the girl who paid for everything in cash, kind of never really get to see where it is anymore. It's like, if you, in the same way that like if you let that muscle atrophy, like you don't see it. You don't really know what you're capable of. You don't really know what it's going to be like. Part of the reason I mention this is I listened to Joe Rogan's podcast and just heard this over October reboot, and it was funny to hear about all the different characters, and well, not characters, people. They are humans, people. But funny to hear about kind of what each background is, and you know, what how ambiguous it was that, you know, some of them were going to do. And I think our credit score is pretty similar, oddly enough. But like I said, so part of it about not maxing out all your credit cards and having a number of different lines is being able to show other creditors that you can manage that, you don't max yourself out, and that you can be responsible. I mean, that's more or less kind of how it goes as we get older. As we get older, we have more responsibilities, whether it's managing your own schedule, whether it's showing up to work, whether it's taking care of yourself physically, whether it's taking care of your car, your house, your friends, whatever it is. We get to a point where there's just a lot to juggle all the time. And not only paying your utilities, but your credit needs to be part of that. And going back to the significance also as to why I wanted to talk about some of this is, you know, I think there's a growing gap between the haves and have-nots. And I think there are a number of millennials that look at a lot of our parents and stop and think, well, these people were stupid. They didn't figure this out. They got burned in the recession. You know, I don't want to be like that. And like I said, I've mentioned my friend who just wants to buy a house and die in it. And, you know, that is, if that's what somebody wants to do, that's awesome. Good for you. And I'm not going to hold that against you by any means. You know, I mean, I'm happy for anybody who gets to pursue what they want to do. And think everybody should have the opportunity to do so. But part of doing that, you know, comes back to understanding what gets you there and being able to qualify for a loan and everything. That's part of it. But I think there are just so many people who just look at the pricing on homes and just take a step back and think, well, I guess that's never going to be me. But this, you know, $4,000 a month rent payment, I know how that works. Yeah, I've rented. I know I'm a good renter. And look, that's fine. If that's what you want to do forever, good, you know, totally fine. But for those of you who don't want to do that, who want to do something more, one of the important things to know is who, how, and why gets money, whether that's from a bank, whether that's from a job that pays you for it, or what have you. I mean, there's all sorts of, and I'm obviously an animal lover. We heard my dog bark. There's a number of different ways to slice a pie, skin a cat, whatever your personal preference of language is. Slice a pie is probably a lot better. Skin a cat's probably just more classic. Ragsy, love you. There's a number of different ways to go about all sorts of different things, though, is my point. And there's no wrong way to do anything. It just, this whole gap in understanding of how to get from point A to point B is the part that kills me. You know, there's so many people who don't seem to understand that. And part of the reason why I wanted to talk about credit scores is there's a large part of me that feels like that's how the recession happened in the first place. Not just credit scores in particular, but this gap in understanding of how does this work. And part of this is I was talking to somebody else about, you know, how do people learn about this? Because I've talked to a number of different people about this and who don't seem to be educated on how this industry works and how to improve how to have a good score. What is a good score? How to get to a point to have a good score. It's now, given I had a very different upbringing than maybe most people did. My dad's a financial advisor. Mom had an MBA. Parents are both very good about understanding how money works and, more importantly, how to leverage it. And part of it comes from understanding that it's important to have a good credit score so people will give you more money and you can leverage your own money. And that's probably one of the things that they're best at, for sure. And I'm sure there are people who are better at it than them, but in terms of an education that way, they were probably in a top percentile, for sure. But going back to the recession in terms of how that happened, I think that there were a number of people who were not educating themselves on or looking at what the payment was. Just walk into a bank and say, I like this house, will you give me money for it? And given I wasn't there during those days, I'm not 100% sure that that's how that happened. But to have that extreme animosity against a bank, I'm a big believer that emotional reactions like that happen when your expectations are not met, right? So if you call a restaurant and you think you've made a reservation and then you show up and they don't have that reservation scheduled for you, you're going to be pretty upset. Or you think you have planned that night to go do a certain thing, and then turns out you show up and you don't have those plans. Probably pretty irritating. And that response is generally probably going to be disappointment, anger, or something of that nature. I gotta take a pause break real quick. Right back. Okay, sorry about that. So I think a lot of people got into hot water because they looked at a bank, they quote unquote fogged a mirror, as people say how it worked back then. And the bank said, sure, you're alive, housing's going up, this is great, let's give you a mortgage. Because, you know, worse comes to worse, it's increasing in value. So, well, it's a win-win for everybody, even if you can't make the payment. And I don't think enough people took a step back and decided whether or not they could afford the payment. And if for whatever reason they signed up for an adjustable rate mortgage and the mortgage rate started at 6% and then jumped to 10% after X number of months, that changes their payment significantly and maybe pushes them out of their home, and then maybe they can't afford to sell it because there's a correction of some sort. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons. But the important thing is understanding what is in your financial capacity to do. And relying on somebody else to tell you whether or not you can afford something is not always the best way to go about something. I mean, I'll never forget my car that I have now. I don't love. It's great, reliable, responsible car. And I knew it was what I wanted. It's not my favorite. But I remember walking onto the dealership and this sales rep took my card and kept calling me. Knew that I was getting down to the wire and needed a car. So he was doing his job, calling me. But he would yell at me. I've never had somebody yell at me and yell at, like this. I should qualify this. Not like this. Yelled at me trying to calculate and back me into what I could afford. And the thing that infuriated me more than anything was I yelled at the guy and said, look, I can get whatever car I want. In all reality, I could. It didn't mean that that's what I should do, because I don't want to burn all of my money on a car, which most of the time is a depreciating asset. Now, for like my client who had a super killer Defender and got it for a smoking deal during the middle of the recession, and now it's not the recession, yeah, you probably made some money on it and still got to enjoy the car. The number of times that happens is so low. And watch Jay's Garage or something or other to get a better idea of how cars appreciate or depreciate in value. But 9 times out of 10, if you're getting a brand new car, you use it and it's worth less. That's more or less how that goes. And you can look it all up. I mean, there's plenty of sites where you can see, oh, this car with X number of miles on it is a lot less than the one with no miles on it. Although for classic antique cars, generally doesn't work quite that way. So, but I didn't want that. I didn't want to tie up all of my money in a depreciating asset, because it's literally just giving my money away to just go buy and drive around. And that's fine for some people. I don't want to do that. I'm young. I'm young, and in an ideal world, I'm utilizing this money to do greater, bigger, and better things. And to have, how about just have a savings of some sort? That works too. Have a 401k, Roth IRA, whatever it is. Whatever savings you set up or structure or however you want to use it, don't care. But to tie it all up in a depreciating asset, something that just loses money, probably not the wisest thing. So this guy was calling me up saying, oh, want to back you into a payment, what can you afford? I'm like, that's the wrong question. I don't care what I can afford. And I told him I could get whatever car I wanted. What I want to do is get the right car for me and my needs, because that's more significant to me. I mean, it doesn't... just don't understand people sometimes. And the sad part was I knew I wanted a car from this company, and I could have gone to another dealer. I mean, that's obvious, but I got to a point where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm stuck with this guy that's calling. It drives me nuts and terrible. And yelling at me. I'm going to pay somebody who's yelling at me? No, don't think so. So I called the manager and ended up just leaving him a message telling him my story. He referred me to somebody else. And this time I didn't need somebody to guide me in a direction. I knew exactly what I wanted. So it was just a matter of like, well, if I structure the payment this way, what's my payment look like? If I structure it this way, what's it look like? If I got this car, what's it look like? If I got this other car, what would it look like? And I just made it work for me. I mean, and didn't let it stress me out, and didn't walk away feeling like I got a hosed. In fact, the hilarious part that I still say is ever since I've had my car, I really like cars, and I go online and I look to see what the deals that they're offering are on said car, and I've not seen it repeated. I have, in a good way for me, as in I got a better deal on my car than I have seen since. And very happy with that, and that was because I did my homework, and part of it was looking at hybrid, non-hybrid. Go figure, the hybrid would have been cheaper at the end of the day. My theory is that the residual value is better. Probably a conversation for a different day, because we're talking about credit scores. But in that situation, I didn't let somebody else dictate and try to tell me what I could or could not afford. I didn't let my bank account try to tell me what I could or could not afford. I picked something that suited my needs. And it's funny, there's other podcasts I listen to where they talk about, they were driving this super cool, flashy car, and then they get a better understanding of how money is a tool, and they trade it in and they get some less flashy, far less exciting, practical car. And don't get me wrong, I'll get one of those cool, fun, flashy cars someday, but in the meantime, I don't need a cool, flashy car. I've got a 100-pound dog that it goes with me to a lot of different places, so probably going to get some sort of dog mom car next. But the other thing too is you can always need rainy day funds. You need security, and part of that security is having a good credit score. I mean, I've personally been in situations where having to stretch things a little farther than I would like to, and having that 5% interest credit card and knowing that that's in my back pocket, or knowing that I've got, between all my credit cards, X number of dollars in equity that I have access to, pending I needed it, good to know. I mean, if for whatever reason I lose my marbles and burn through all my savings, it's good to know that I have access to that. I mean, look, paying the interest would suck, but if I can consolidate and get a personal loan and then pay it all off, I'd look better than nothing. So many of these systems are really, I think I view them all as just safety nets. And maybe that's a good way to structure it, is really they're safety nets. And they're safety nets and security. And like I said in the first go around, in a country that doesn't have, we've got some stuff, but if you've had the luxury of traveling to Europe, a best friend of mine, I think I mentioned her, lives in Germany. And I've gone to visit her, and it's astounding. They have, their homeless population is almost non-existent. And it's not to say it's because everybody's just floating everybody all the time or what have you, but it's they just don't, I don't know, not there. This is a part that I don't know nearly as much about, but being able to set yourself up and have security or stability or planning for whatever future endeavor you have, it's pretty important to make sure that's buttoned up and tight. It also is one of the things that allows you to get a home. Most lenders aren't going to say, hey, you need a $400,000 mortgage and you've got a credit score in the low fives. Sure, we're going to give you an interest rate of low fours. No. If they give you a loan at all, they're going to give you a loan with an interest rate that's astronomical, because they need to hedge their risk and make sure that you're going to pay, because with this score in the low fives or high fours, you've basically demonstrated to them that you're not reliable. Personal note, most of the time when we have tenants who come to us and apply with the score in the sevens, generally pretty solid. Can't speak for everybody, but for us, that works just fine. And all lenders are different. There's, like I said, you'll see it on Trulia. They vary significantly, and you can tinker around with some of this in the same way that you can tinker around with Credit Karma or some of these other sites in terms of, okay, if I were to buy a new car, if I'm going to buy a home, if I'm going to not pay off my credit card, if I'm going to do this or that. I mean, there's so many scenarios. It's just that was one of the first lessons I remember my parents really teaching me, is making sure that credit score looks good. Because if you're ever in a bind, you need to make sure that you have solutions or resources or avenues or moves. I'm going to call them moves because to anyone who knows my dad is, well, I'm the apple that tree fell from, but he is severely competitive. And growing up, I remember playing Monopoly, chess, what have you, and that man would not let me win even at the age of 5. If he was always determined to win. And I think in part it was supposed to be a lesson that, the smartest person wins or whatever. But whether it was Monopoly or chess, both of those games are more or less puzzles in terms of, okay, well, if I do this, then what are the hypothetical repercussions of that move? And, what moves can my opponent do? There's a lot of kind of strategic thinking that way. And I think having a healthy credit score is, not unlike being on a chessboard and having infinite number of moves, as opposed to losing all your pieces and being stuck with just your king and trying to bounce around one spot to one spot to one spot and really just delaying your inevitable death, really. Yeah, it's something I think that gets overlooked, and I feel like I've talked to too many people, too many peers who don't have a good understanding of it, and it breaks my heart. And I hope everybody has the chance to do some homework, do some research, watch this, go tinker around with Credit Karma, go tinker around with something else to figure out what it is that you can do to at the end of the day really help yourself, and to not be one of those people caught in a recession. I mean, there was another time I had an open house one time, and this woman walks in. She's renting, on the verge of retirement, if not already retired. And she and her husband used to live in Corona. They got caught. They had to short sale their home. She walked in. This may have been about 6 months ago or so. And she's telling me, yeah, it was pretty hard. It really ruined our credit. But, I think we can buy again now. After she's told me that she's just retired and her husband's on the verge of retirement. And I'm sitting here thinking, you don't understand how this works. If you guys don't have income, how do you pay off that loan? How do you pay off that mortgage? Why would somebody give you another opportunity to lose another home? And maybe, look, there's a good possibility that I don't have a full grasp of that picture. But history is to repeat itself. And in a situation like that, I just... on the verge of retirement. I don't have any words for that, and it breaks my heart. And I realize there's such a limited education when it comes to finance. And again, I didn't major in finance. I don't have an MBA. I have no qualifications that really are concrete that I could walk into somebody and say, I know it all. What I can do is more or less kind of share my experience growing up in the industry I've worked in and seeing different people's financial health and the education I've had in fixing my own credit history and running my mouth some. But situations like that really just, they break my heart. And break my heart and make me mad at the same time. I'm heartbroken that somebody doesn't understand, and I'm mad that somebody didn't educate them, which is in part why I started this. Because it's limited. It's limited and it's stupid. It's real stupid. I mean, it's how this, again, more or less capitalist society. It's more or less how this whole thing works. I mean, we have the #1 economy in the world as far as I know. And it's my understanding that if California pulled off from the U.S., we'd be number 6 in the world. Now, that may have changed because I think the last time I looked at that was a long time ago. But I just don't want people to be caught in that situation. I'd much rather... There would be nothing more than to make me happy than to see a bunch of financially healthy people that have an understanding of how this all works and know what you can do. Don't go ask the bank, can I do this? Until you get caught with your pants down. I mean, know for yourself. Know what your avenues are. Know what's in your capacity. Know what your ability is. Exercise all of it. Know it. Know what your limitations are. Know what's in... It just makes me so mad. And the part that I think really makes me mad is coming back and understanding. And people I know. People I'm very... People I would expect to know, to understand, and have to know how it all works. And they don't. They just don't. It's not part of their knowledge. It makes me so mad. But I'm not necessarily mad at them. And I do my best to say one thing or another to help, but there's only so much I can do, and there's only so much I can say in those instances. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep doing this and hopefully help other people to achieve that financial knowledge, financial health, financial independence. So you're not this retired woman who's walking into an open house telling me that you lost your home in a short sale and telling me that your husband's on the verge of retirement, saying you think you can qualify for a home now. Or the girl who pays for everything in cash because she had an ex-boyfriend 10 years ago who ruined her credit. It's just not the right way to operate, and knowing you should never be surprised. You should never be surprised by what comes back to you. You should know. If you ask somebody, I mean, that, to be honest, that's been one of the most powerful things is since having to fix so part of me fixing my credit score was opening new lines of credit, using them, and paying them off, right? So that's part of it. The second part was I don't want too many lines of credit, and when I continue to open new lines of credit, it decreases my overall age history because it's a average. It's not a weighted score. It's just an average, right? So instead of opening new lines, I called and increased the lines on my existing credit cards. So if, I think the amazing one was, I think Nordstrom's gave me like a $1,600 line, and they increased it to like $8,000 with a single phone call. I've never used that much. I don't think I've ever spent more than $200 to $300 on a single month from Nordstrom. Doesn't matter. It's there. I've got a Visa instead of just an in-store credit. So now I can take the same card, go to other stores. It's great. It's made such a difference. And knowing that that's what you can do to improve some of these, $1,600 to $8,000. I had had the card for maybe a year and a half or so, and just was like, yep, I'm doing my job. Everything's paid off. Yeah, you're happy, right? Let's increase this. They're like over the phone, by the way. Like, I'm sure they had to like pull my credit. I'm sure I had to give them my social security number or what have you. But, oh my God. More than, what is that? They increased it by like 4 times more. Like they increased it by like 5-6 fold. How nuts is that? Through a single phone call and a good payment history. Somebody just told me like, yeah, you can have $8,000. And then on top of it, because I've increased the line that I have access to, my overall credit usage goes down. And so it went from, so if I'm spending $200 a month, hypothetically, at Nordstrom's, so, what is that? $200 to $1,600 is, what, north of, we'll just say north of 10%, right? So it's probably closer to 12%. Now, if I don't change my spending habit, because I'm not making that much more, if any, because that's how I should operate, is based on my own income, not what somebody is willing to give me. And I'm spending the $200, but now it's an $8,000 line of credit, whatever, something, I don't even remember. All of a sudden, that north of 10% ratio goes to what? 2% if it's $8,000? Nothing. And that all of a sudden makes me look really good for my credit history. And I probably got that math wrong. Please correct me. But yeah, I mean that's exactly how that works. Is that they want to see that you're functioning like that you're purchasing based on what is in your capacity, based on your income, not what they give you. Because you should be able to figure it out. You should not be waiting for a bank to tell you what you can and cannot do. But there are just so many people who, like this couple, they're like, I think we can. Like, based on what? Do you know? How do you know? Go figure it out. So, there are so many resources out there. It's so important to know this information. And I think it's one of these things that people skip over. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, my friend got a new car. I want a new car. Well, how'd your friend get that new car? How are you going to get a new car? Or, I want to buy a house. My friend's bought a house. I want to buy a house. Okay. Can you qualify for a loan? How do you know you can qualify for a loan? Do you not know you can qualify for a loan? Go figure out what it takes and what you can afford. It's okay to not know all the answers. It's okay to need to research it. But do your homework for multiple resources. I don't think it behooves anybody to have a single bank, a single whatever omniscient presence there. tell you what you can and cannot do. Cross-reference. Double check. And when you have a good credit score, you've generally figured that out, and you've done your homework, and you've learned, because it takes work to get it there. It doesn't happen overnight. And all these resources will tell you exactly how to get it there. And once you get it there, you know how to keep it there, because you got it there in the first place. And you keep functioning that way because you do want some of these things, or you do, hell, fine. You don't want all this stuff and you want a tiny house and you want to operate a whole nother way. Fine. Get a travel credit card with miles and points and all this other stuff. Go for the experiences. Totally. I mean, well, I kind of screwed up. I was supposed to go to Australia. I should have paid for it via my points credit card, but friend bought the tickets. I'm paying it back, but that's okay. In another life, I'll reconfigure that and I'll book the trip and get the points the next time. He'll pay me back. But yeah, there's just do your homework, learn about it. Like I said, my personal favorite is Credit Karma, Trulia, for messing around with some of these things. I'm sure there are a number of other resources. Those are just personal favorites that especially worked for me. And empower yourself. Empowering yourself and not being dependent on somebody else to do this is so freeing. Like knowing that you have the freedom to do what you want, and that you're not dependent on a single resource, a single person, single entity, structure, bank, what have you. It's important. So hopefully this was helpful for some people, if not just some semblance of relief for myself. And sorry I missed last few weeks here. Sorry about the barking dog. Should be doing another episode hopefully next week. Trying to get back on the bandwagon and be more consistent here. More likely, maybe talking about the overall market and what new legislation was passed, given that today is November 6th. If you haven't voted by now, sorry you missed it. I don't think you can do any sort of absentee voting. Well, I shouldn't say delayed absentee voting. There's a reason why the vote day is the day. But yeah, may talk about some of that. May talk about something else. As always, give a little hint and post it on my Instagram, which you can find me at Christina Heinstead. Thanks for watching. Myself and Max say bye. See you later. And happy Taco Tuesday.